Okay, now we're ready to go through and create our first set of illustrations. We're going to create 4 illustrations to begin with. And let's start by creating a blank storyboard. That's where we store and organize our illustrations into. So let's do select, and we'll just do a new storyboard, and we'll change this to my storyboard. Okay, and you'll see if I bring up and show the storyboard panel again that there's nothing down here. No illustrations have been created, and that's going to be our job for the next step here. So for our first illustration, let's just go and let's hit home. We'll get into a nice viewpoint here, and we're going to create a title for this. So let's just kind of move this to the side a little, leave some room for a text here, and then we're just going to say new illustration, and we'll call it title. So when you do this, we can edit the markups now or later. Let's just go ahead and edit some, which will put us into editing markup mode. You'll notice we have an orange border around the view. This indicates that we're working on the illustration. So any changes we make, any movements I make here, are going to be captured into the final illustration. When I add text, this is going to be captured too. So let's add a title here. Let's just call this height and pivot. You'll notice that it turns red when the spelling's wrong. Spell checker is built in there. Okay, so we'll just say okay on that. Position that here nicely. And so we've now created our first illustration. And when I hit the checkbox here, that's going to save it off, or that's going to capture what's there. And then you'll see my thumbnail down here representing this illustration gets rendered. So how this works is if you're ever off of this, you can always go down here and click on the illustration to bring it back up. Or once we have a couple here, we'll be able to step through those or show those in different ways. Okay, so for our next illustration, we're going to want to create something from the opposite side. So I can hit escape, and that will deactivate, if you will, that illustration. And I'm going to bring up the viewpoint panel, which happens to be here. Oh, by the way, you can always bring up panels by right-clicking and choosing just from the menu here. That's another easy way to get to any panel that you might need instead of having to find it in the ribbon itself. So that's a shortcut for you. So we're going to pick a different viewpoint here. That looks like the home. We actually want the opposite side of that one for this illustration here. And then we're going to capture this second illustration. And for this example, we're just going to add some balloons and show how that you can do that. Balloons. And that's really simple. You use the call out tool, and you can click this, and then you just begin to drag off from that point. Well, I picked the same part twice, so I'm just going to delete that one. And this is how you can do it manually. In a moment, we'll talk about how you can do a little more automated version of pulling off of these balloons. So let's see. Grab a few more here. We'll call it a wrap. Okay. So we've now created 5 balloons, and if we wanted to change the format of those, for example, we actually want to make them balloons, we can select all of them, and then we can bring up the properties panel over here, and then we can turn on the balloon lines, and I'll pick circle at this point. So you can also go and pick different squares or whatever you would like for those. Another thing you can do, just while we're in here, if I select all these, you can bold them, italicize them, etc., change the font, the size, everything up here using this part of the interface as well. Okay, so that's our second illustration. Again, I click checkbox, and we end up with it captured down here, and now we have these two that we can flip through. Again, I'm going to hit escape. You don't really have to do that, but it's always kind of clean to hit escape before you make another one. And our next one is going to be highlighting in on this L bracket. So again, we're going to hit home. I'm going to highlight the L bracket, and we'll zoom in on this. You know, I actually would prefer a different highlighting color. So before we do that, I'm going to go over here and pick a highlight color of this brighter red, and then we're going to make our illustration. Okay, so let's do that. And this is just going to be our third illustration. We'll do new. We'll do a part that is selected is all we're really showing here. And in this case, we don't want to edit markups. We're not going to add any markups. We're just going to select that part and grab an illustration from there. So I'm going to turn off the edit markups part, and we'll just capture that illustration. And you can see that it goes straight down to the board here, and we're ready to go. I think you can also hit Control E to capture illustrations without even hitting the button. That's a shortcut key, Control E. And then for our final one, I'm going to do right click here and I'm going to isolate the selection and then hit home on just that selected part. And then we'll go and we'll take one more here. And this is going to be isolated. And in this case, we do want to add a markup, so I'm going to turn that back on. And then we're going to pull off, you're going to show a way you can use metadata here. So I'm going to just take a call out and we'll pull that off here. And you'll notice that it has a number. First of all, I want to turn off that outline on it, so I'll do that. And then I'm going to right click and we're going to pick change text. And we're going to change this to actually a part node, which is the metadata coming in. And instead of number, we're going to scroll up here and we're going to pick material. Okay, so that's going to indicate the material. And you can see that it just pulls that out of the metadata that came from came over from Solid Edge. That's one of the compatibility points on the software. Okay, so now let's see. Let's close this one out. Save it or whatever. Click the checkbox, and you'll see that we've created our first 4 illustrations. And we can click through those here. We'll talk about these boxes in between in a minute. That's the transitions. And so I think the next step we want to do is we want to jump in and do some publishing.